Thanks. Okay, yeah, so I'm here to talk about building, my Tableau resume. But to just expand a little bit on kind of a little bit about me. So I do have a day job, and I'm the manager of an analytics team for a financial services firm, and that role is actually in IT. And so I do a lot both around Tableau server administration, but also around, educating other people who are using Tableau, providing a center of practice, and yeah, kind of thinking about strategy and literacy and all of those fun things. But in my free time, I love Tableau so much. It's also a hobby. And so I lead a few user groups, the Data Book Club, and because of those things, I think I'm lucky to be a Tableau ambassador. So it's a little bit about me. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn at Brandi Beals, and I have a website where I do some blogging as well. If you're interested in, learning more about I feel like I really like Tableau server because there's so many wonderful people doing amazing, wonderful, exciting things with Tableau desktop. Tableau server, I don't think gets a lot of love. And so I really like talking about how that tool can be useful to an organization. So if that's up your alley, check out my blog at brandibeals.com. But that's actually not even what I'm here to talk about. Today, it's really about talking about how I built my resume in Tableau. And so I'm going to kind of start by talking about how I was inspired or what inspired this, and then how I kind of went through the process of collecting my own data, how I organized and structured that data, and then how I went to visualize it. And then, as with most things that you build in Tableau, there's always opportunity to iterate, especially at the start of a new year, right? There's never something that I built 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago that I won't go back and improve now. So I want to say I'm about a year out from having created this resume. And so there's already things that I'm like, I'll change this and change that and change this. So, so iteration, it's always an element within the process. So that's how I kind of plan to go through this today. I'm a big fan of questions, of that engagement. So I would love to hear your feedback or your thoughts. You're not going to hurt my feelings if you hate what I've done, or you would do it a different way. Everyone's perspectives are valid, so feel free to chime in. Okay, enough of the PowerPoint. Let's dive into my resume. So let's start first with what I've created. So this is the version I've created. There's actually a few variations. This is the one that's out on Tableau Public. And it looks very mysterious, and I feel like I kind of did that on purpose. Also, my undergrad degree is in art and economics. So there's the artistic side of me that's let's add something different and make it mysterious. So there's not any titles besides my name. We'll talk more about that. That's an artistic choice. But this is my resume. We're going to talk through the different components of it. So on this left-hand side, obviously, my picture and some helpful links. But then this piece right here is my education and experience. So where I went to school, where I studied abroad, where some of my first jobs were, and then the length of the bar is obviously how long I've been there. And then some of my kind of extracurriculars. So that's what this is. This bit on the right, this spider graph, is basically a kind of different skills within the data lifecycle, like a data project lifecycle, if you will, but represented as a spider graph. So that's what this is. And then here we have skills almost. So we've got analytics, statistics, leadership, etc. Over here, these are technologies. So again, there's always room for improvement, but this is kind of where I've started, or what I've initially created. And this down here are just different events that I'm involved in. So we're going to dive in deeper, but before we kind of take a look at how these elements were built, I want to show how the data was structured. So I have all my data in a Google Drive like sheet, and I've got 4 different tabs, because, you know, I feel like you kind of start with the basics, like what jobs you had, or maybe where you went to school or whatever, with start and end dates. So I have a category column that distinguishes between education or experience or something called extra professional, which is like extracurricular, except it's like professional stuff. And this is an actual word. I didn't know that. But extracurricular felt like too high school to me. So I wanted to, you know, have a distinction that it's a professional engagement, right? So extra professional is a word. And yeah, just, you know, what the organization was, what my role was, and then, you know, maybe the location, and then like start and end dates, and anything that is ongoing or current doesn't have an end date. So that's that. We then have skills and certifications. So, you know, I've been kind of slowly keeping track of all of the courses that I might have taken, if I have any certifications, if, you know, what products like tools or technologies I'm comfortable with, languages. Coming up with categories sometimes can be difficult. And then this thing called life cycle, and this is actually what is used to create the spider graph, just these rows. But I'm kind of just using skills and certifications to collect all of that data. I'm giving myself a rank. So this is just self-reported. These ranks are just self-reported on a scale of 1 to 10. How good am I at this thing? For certifications and things of that nature, I've put like a date that certification was completed. So that is skills and certifications, relatively simple structure. For LinkedIn skills, so the bit where there's kind of like 2 bar charts and they're different skills, I will say, okay, with this skills and certifications, again, this information, these rankings are self-reported. I really didn't like that. I really didn't like me just arbitrarily deciding I am this good at this thing. I understand that that's important, but I wanted something that was like that wasn't up to me, right? That I could just collect data from somewhere that quantified my skills in a certain area. And so that's where, that's where the LinkedIn skills came in. So on my LinkedIn profile, I have a lot of endorsements for different things. And so I basically took that data, scraped that data off of LinkedIn and put that into this sheet here. And again, the categories, there's just 2. There's either a concept or like a technology and tool specifically. So a concept of like statistics or leadership are kind of in here with the different counts of endorsements, and then the same with technology. So you'll see Tableau's in here. So yeah, so that's the data. Oh, one other tab, events. So I've been leading the Milwaukee Tableau user group since 2015. Been involved in a lot of those meetings. I'll occasionally speak, like I am here. I started up the Data Book Club. So all of those things are in here. And I'm just kind of tracking whether it's a speaking engagement, a Data Book Club, whatever, who's it for, what the name of it is, what role I played, whether it was just like the host or whether I was a judge or whatever, and the date that occurred. And then I have like a, you know, obviously a column for URL. So that's the structure of my data. Again, feel free to, you know, ask any questions or post things in the chat, but hopefully that's like relatively straightforward. I did put these on 4 separate tabs because the data itself is just kind of so different. It just made sense. I've set them up as well in my Tableau workbook as 4 separate data sources. So let's jump over to Tableau desktop. Each of those different tabs is set up as a separate data source here. And I did that, I guess, like one of the places I'd like to iterate on is to actually relate these data sources in some way so that maybe when I click on this experience, I can see my skills at that time, or I can hover over the Tableau skill, and maybe that gets highlighted in the data lifecycle chart. So there's definitely opportunities to do that. The data model becomes more complex when that happens. So something I'm still working on. So if you guys have any suggestions or resources for me, I'd love to hear that. But that's how I'm currently setting everything up. So let's get to the fun stuff, which is how I actually built this. So this is the version I kind of currently have. The only difference is I now have some titles. Okay. So let's talk about each one of these things. I'll start with the events because I think this one's just easiest. So essentially, we've got our events data source with all those different fields. And all I have here is the date field on my column shelf. And this creates this x-axis. So every individual, and then actually, so on my detail shelf, or on my tooltip, oh, you know what I did? This is what I did, because Tableau loves to aggregate things. I turned off under analysis, aggregate measures. I deselected this. So it's on by default, but I turned it off. I do the same thing when I create scatter plots. So this is essentially a one-dimensional scatter plot. And so every event, every individual event becomes its own independent dot along this axis, which is the date. Let's see, I also have a color here on whether something is a milestone or not. And this is just a set that I've created based on the event name. So essentially I went to event name, I right-clicked and went to create set, and I created this set. So let's take a look at what this one looks like. So essentially I just came in here and selected certain event names, and we're like, these are milestone events for me. So like this security training and governance, oh my, this is when I presented at the Tableau conference. It's something I'm like really proud of. So that becomes like a milestone event. So, and actually I would say this one is too. So once I have that, that goes on the color shelf, and that's just what distinguishes these pink circles from the others. Okay. And I've added some information. So I've added today to the detail shelf, and then a lot of information to the tooltip, so that when I hover over any of these things, I get additional information about, what the event was, who it was for, what the date was, where it was, things like that. And then on some of these, let's actually just take a look at the tooltip. Where did my tooltip go? Okay, so I've got event name, event category, group, role, date, location, and then this URL option text. And so URL option text is actually a calculated field over here. And I believe all this is just text that says like, okay, if the URL is null, return null. Otherwise, if there's something in that URL column, we want to add some text that says click for more information. Because not everything has a URL, like this one, no URL for this. But some of these have a URL. And so if I click, okay, when I'm on the dashboard and I click one of those, it actually takes me out to any sort of supplementary information that there might be. So it could be a recording from that user group meeting, for example. So that's the events tab. The next thing is like the top 10, both concepts and top 10 technologies. So these are pretty simple because they're just bar charts, but kind of fancy bar charts, I suppose. Fancy for me, at least. So the first thing is I've got my skills, and I've added the skill category to the filter shelf. And here I'm only filtering on the concepts, but I've added this filter to context. So when you right click on a filter, you can add a filter to context, or when it's already in context, you can remove it from context. So context filter is this gray color, and essentially that filter gets applied first, and then all the other filters get applied. And the reason I need to do that is because I want the top 10 concepts. So concept needs to be applied first and then top 10 skills. If I didn't have it in context, then I'd only be given 7 skills would be returned, because out of the top 10 skills, only 7 are within that concept category. So if I want top 10 concepts, I have to add concept to context. And then this is actually so I like to hide the headers sometimes, but in this case, maybe it's good that they're out. Again, iteration. Can always go back and improve upon this, but I'm doing I'm doing a little bit of a hack here to say, okay, take the number of endorsements. That's going to create this basically point at the end, and then take this calculated field that's basically the minimum, like basically it's saying give me a point at 0. So we've got 0, and we've got the number of LinkedIn endorsements, and then they're connected by a single line, and that's what creates the rounded bar chart. So it's a bar chart, but if you want rounded corners, you have to go through this hassle. So it's just a hassle, I guess, I wanted to go through, but I've done that for top 10 concepts and top 10 technologies. So they're both set up exactly the same. And I'm going to just turn off the header here. Let's jump over to, I'm just going to jump back to the resume real quick. So there we go. So we've got the events, right? All sorts of stuff down here. You can even filter on them if you want. Because I feel like I don't really have a great answer for this, but all of these events at the end here, the more recent events, there's just so many that it might be helpful, to potentially zoom in on something. So I don't know, I still need to figure that out, but you can filter in on those. We've talked about the expertise or the different concepts and the technologies that I have experience in. I want to then talk about this kind of Gantt chart. So it's very similar to the expertise and technologies in that they're rounded bar charts. I use the same kind of concept, but it's a bit more of like Gantt chart style. So the different starting points are different. They don't all start at 0. And so one of my favorite tips is to use something called the caption card. So I don't know how many people know about the caption card, but I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit. I'm going to jump back to top 10 concepts to show you the caption card, and then we'll come back here. So when you are on your sheet and you right click anywhere in this gray background, you have these cards like the title or caption or summary. So the summary, for example, if you have a lot of measures, the summary will kind of tell you what the average or the min max is. And you can even add additional information if you're like really nerdy and you're like, I want to understand the kurtosis on my data, or what the first and third quartiles are, but I don't want to create a box plot. You can get all that summary statistics from that summary card. But similarly, there's something called the caption card. So here it's already enabled, but it's not enabled by default. But the caption essentially is Tableau's way of describing your chart in like a dynamic automated way. Okay, so this is saying it's the trend of LinkedIn endorsements, and it's saying trend because this is a line chart of LinkedIn endorsements and minimum 0 for LinkedIn skill, right? And it tells you that it's keeping just the concept and it's filtered on the top 10. This is okay, but it's really not great. So what I usually do is I'll actually repurpose the caption card to leave myself notes like here. So you can double click on this and it becomes a text editor, just like, you know, your tooltip or just like your title. So I actually put in here an article on how to do a rounded Gantt chart, because I don't know. I mean, I have confidence that I could have figured it out, but if other people have done it, like, lean on them. So somebody else has figured out how to do this. I referenced their kind of blog post and I did it myself, but then I will add additional notes. So like when I dig into it and I figure out like what's going on, I like to leave myself notes, because then I can save myself time in the future. So essentially this rounded Gantt chart, you know, takes advantage of the line path concept the same way that we did in top 10 concepts. But in this case, it's calculating the difference between like an arbitrary date and the start date. And then these are kind of used to create these different points. So we've got a start date, we've got an end date that have been calculated, and then the line literally just connects the two. And I made it vertical as opposed to horizontal. I don't know, probably because I like the way it fit. I feel like it was more consolidated and condensed and I had more vertical space to work with. So, so I really love using the caption card. And then, yeah, I just like with the top 10 skills, I just added information into the tooltips so you can hover over here and get more information about each of these different elements. One thing I'll note real quick is this is the calculation that creates the end date. The start date is very similar, but this just calculates the number of days between, again, an arbitrary start date, in this case, 7/1/2005, and the end date. And that just kind of determines when the axis begins. Okay, and then if the end date is null, it uses today. So the job I currently have will still have an end date of today, right? And then one last thing that's kind of similar is, again, this is my current job that I have, and I started in January 2015 and it goes to present. So I created a calculated field that's relatively simple that just says like, hey, if the end date is null, use the word present. Otherwise, format the date in this specific way. Because I wanted it to say like March 2015. So anyway, that's pretty much how I created this one. It was, again, relatively simple. Well, and I have activity date too going across the top so that the different bars aren't, you know, running into one another. Yeah, color would absolutely help here. We could absolutely do that. I think that's category. So we could definitely do something like that if that were helpful. Yeah. I was also, I mean, like, I love the idea of little icons too, like a diploma or, you know, books or something for education versus a job being something else. So yeah, absolutely it would. My problem, honestly, is that I just love black. I really like to keep things very minimalist, but color would be great. Yeah. Yeah. again, I don't know. I honestly, I gotta be honest. This felt like more a combination of not only like I finally wanted to do my resume in Tableau, but also an exercise. Like this isn't a very serious project. It just was like a fun thing for me personally that I wanted to almost push the boundaries of like minimalism, which is why the version that's out in Tableau Public, like there's literally no text besides my name. I should even just remove that, honestly. So it's more, it feels a little bit more like art than anything, but yeah, color would probably be helpful. Color is interesting, right? Because I like to use a consistent color scheme across the entire thing I'm doing. And if I color that, then I can't color something else, it feels like. So definitely room for improvement. So the last chart I wanted to touch on is this kind of spider graph. Honestly, I love a bar chart. If I had to pick a favorite, it would be the bar chart. They're just so versatile. But I didn't want a bunch of bar charts. I wanted something to kind of make it stand out. And that's not probably the best way to go about visualizing your data, but again, for more of an artistic perspective, that's what I wanted to do. So I thought, again, taking my skills and putting them into like a data analytics project lifecycle type of chart kind of just made sense to me. Now, maybe it would be better with a different graphic in the background, but that's essentially what I did. There were two articles I found particularly helpful. The first was this one by Ken Flerledge, who talked about radar charts. And it's a very flexible tool, but I almost found the flexibility to be daunting. So I used Ken's blog post to create the image that I'm using in the background here, but then this other post I used to kind of do my own calculations. So essentially there is the, in this case, the polygon. So that's this kind of dark gray shaded place. And this is just the life cycle path calculation, which just kind of says, what the different points are. So we've got business understanding, data mining, prep, EDA, feature engineering modeling, and data visualization. So we've got 7 different points here. And then we have, in this case, a dual axis chart. So our Y coordinate is duplicated in order to then have the circles. So the circles are an independent kind of mark type. And here we use, again, the life cycle path. And then the life cycle X and life cycle Y are obviously the things that create the X and Y coordinates. And this math is what I learned from this first blog post that's listed here. So it's the cosine of the radian multiplied by the rank. And then for Y, it is the sine of the radian multiplied by the rank. And the radian is this wonderful thing. So again, all of this math was not something I figured out on my own. I learned from other people and pulled it together. And I kind of just, again, simplified it for my purposes. So this is definitely customized to me because I knew I only had 7 categories. I wasn't trying to make my chart dynamic the way Ken outlines. But anyway, so again, kind of using the caption card to leave myself little clues if I ever need to go back. But generally, it's relatively simple. So the one thing I'll say here is this is a scatter plot. We've got 2 measures on both the column shelf and the row shelf, creating 2 axes. And so because it's a scatter plot, or kind of like a map almost, under the map menu, I actually have a background image being used here. I think, no, that's not it. Okay, so I have a background image here. Again, this image was generated using Ken's blog post. But I just come in here, I define, what the starting points are. And I just kind of did this through trial and error. So I uploaded the image and I just said, okay, here's, kind of where it starts in relation to the X and Y measures that have been calculated here. So again, just kind of trial and error. So that's how I created that chart. And again, I'm really interested in taking this to the next level, probably adding a little bit more context back into it. I think I went a little extreme with just kind of removing everything. But I also think it would be interesting to show a little bit more that this is a life cycle, maybe not the spider web look, but maybe just like a circle type of thing. I'm not really sure. So I'm open to feedback, but that's how I went about creating my resume. Really collecting that data was the first step, figuring out what I really wanted to highlight, and then building charts to do that, to kind of reflect what I wanted to. Again, I think we all have, ways that we can make improvements on our stuff. I would probably remove the events chart. It's just too much detail given the rest of the detail that's on here. So anyway, that's my resume. I had one other thing I just wanted to go back to my slide deck, but before I do wrap up, were there any questions?
Yeah, I jumped in to see if there's any questions that people want to add to the chat or the Q&A.
Yeah, okay. And I've been keeping an eye on the Q&A, but not, or on the chat, but not the Q&A. So thank you for the commentary so far. The last thing I'll just close out with, first of all, I'll send you this deck, not that there's a lot to it, but I will link to, and actually, I'll just post it in the chat. I'll link to my resume because you can download it if you want to and kind of reverse engineer and take a look at some of the stuff. But I also wrote a blog post about kind of what I did. So I'll share those things. The last thing I just wanted to mention, sorry, would you share this with your employers? Yeah, I would absolutely do that. I think what's kind of cool, theoretically, I like having a distinction between the type of content I share on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn profile. I don't really list out my individual responsibilities because those become like super out of date and then you can't really customize them to the job you're applying for. So then I have my actual paper resume, my traditional resume, that has a lot more detail. I have different versions of it depending on, what I might be applying for. But I think the Tableau version is nice because there's just things that, like all the events that I'm engaged in that I can't put on I would never put that on a resume or even on LinkedIn. So it's kind of, that part's kind of cool to show, or to even show the LinkedIn endorsements and, the data, like the life cycle stuff. Like those are just things, like it's just a different perspective. So I would totally be open to sharing it with employers. Great question. So the last thing I just wanted to leave you with is, I've mentioned the Data Book Club, but I wanted to welcome you all to join us. So it is, it started during the pandemic because I was missing the in-person networking, right, that I had with my user groups. I was missing that. And I was just kind of like, okay, how can I get people together to like just chat about something? But, in my mind, I'm like, it always has to be productive. So I was like, let's find a book and read a book together. And it's data related, always. And anyway, so we get together once in a while we're reading a book and just chat about it. So if you're ever like in need of motivation for reading some books, or you just kind of want to have some more networking, highly recommend you come. It's super, there's like no commitment. So you can sign up and then like never attend. You can sign up and buy the book and then, you know, come to the first meeting and never again. We read 4 books a year. So this winter we're reading You Look Like a Thing and I Love You. It's about AI. It's a really cool, funny read. We haven't even had our first meeting yet. So if you're interested, I would say sign up, buy the book, start reading, and then join us on Slack and at our meetings. But it's just kind of fun. So
I love this. This is so cool. Big fan of using books to build community. And it, you know, at minimum, you will, whether you agree or disagree with the book, whether you agree or disagree with the people that you're reading the book with, you will have a great conversation, and you'll ultimately learn something. So super cool. And you were telling me a little bit about this book. I'm fascinated. So I may have to join you. So anyway, Brandi, the other thing that I would comment on, you know, I love that you have gone to a super extreme when it comes to the way that you've chosen to visualize this data, which is there's no text, there's no color. And I'm sure that there are people that are like, ooh, I see what you did there. Like, I may not love it, but I love that there's a, you know, what. And so what I love is at the end of the day, like you are on a spectrum of, you know, highly simplified, not that it's not rich in insight, not that there's not information, but what you're basically like, hey, I'm going all the way over here just to show you what it looks like. And I love that, because I wouldn't do it that way, but I love seeing it.
Yeah, exactly. Again, I think that's the great thing about, like, especially doing things in Tableau Public, is you can explore that. But I think the other thing is, like, so often your resume is something that you can just read on a piece of paper. I wanted people to explore that. And so by removing all the text, you have to hover on things to figure out what that is. So anyway.
What I liked about it, and honestly, I love it. My mind was blown to do it that way, because it's funny, my undergrad was packed full of economics, love economics, great, but not art. And I don't think that way. So when I was looking at it, I was thinking, gosh, what a way to also show how you are able to think analytically in multiple different ways and also be artistic in the same time. I mean, just incredible.
Well, thank you. That's really wonderful. Thank you guys for having me, again, for asking such great questions. Hopefully it was kind of exciting, or at the very least, very different, right? So yeah, thank you.
That was great. I like that you also showed the calculations. That's really helpful when someone's like, how would you even do that?
Yeah. Well, again, I did not come up with these, right? I'm you know, standing on the shoulders of others, and I highly recommend that, right? People have done amazing things. Just take what they've done and you know, give credit where credit is due, and that's it.
Steal like an artist. Love it.
Yeah. There you go.